Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies at the University of Oklahoma Outreach for our special self-care webinar series. I'm Asia Mukes, Project Development Manager, and we are excited to offer this special feature for our NCORE community. It has certainly been a challenging time for all of us. Our hope is to remain connected during a time when we're all apart and provide support to you as we continue the conference's tradition of working to improve racial and ethnic relations on college campuses. As you know, we made the extraordinary and heartbreaking decision to cancel NCORE due to the ongoing concerns regarding COVID-19. In 33 years, this is unprecedented. Some of you have been coming to NCORE since its founding. Some started their journey with us in Portland in 2019. Whether you've been coming to NCORE for 20 years or 2 or somewhere in between, we understand the loss that comes in not being able to connect with the community. And we know that this is yet another loss that we're experiencing during this time. So we want you to stay connected to us, connected to your friends in the NCORE community, and connected to the work that still continues on despite our separation. But more importantly, we want you to take care of yourself. This is the second of 3 in what we've titled our self-care series. The first session, titled Grieving NCORE in the Time of COVID, Strategies for Self-Care and Engagement, is now available for viewing on our website. We're particularly excited about the third session, Being Alive into the Future, which will be presented by Dr. Shakti Butler and Michaela Gaston on May 13th. Spaces will be limited. As always, we want to make sure you're live posting. So tweet, Instagram, and Facebook pictures from your office with the hashtag NCORE and start the conversation online. You may end up in a very special NCORE video. Today, we have Stephanie Pelton-Miller, Emma Kupferman, and Victoria Stubbs. All 3 are licensed clinical social workers who are or have been in private practice and who specialize in a number of different areas, including anxiety, PTSD, sexual trauma, intimacy, sexual identity, and relationships. Today, they will discuss strategies for maintaining intimacy and physical and mental health during COVID. But before I turn it over to them, I want to acknowledge the land that we sit on here in Norman, Oklahoma. This land on which we inhabit is physically situated in the original ancestral homelands of the Kickapoo, Osage, and Wichita. We pay respect to the Kickapoo, Osage, and Wichita peoples, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout their historical diaspora. I am going to encourage you to think about the land that you sit on as well. I also want to read NCORE's diversity statement. It is the expectation of the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies that all participants of NCORE webinars enjoy a welcoming and inclusive environment, free from all forms of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. NCORE is committed to fostering an atmosphere that encourages the free expression and exchange of ideas. In pursuit of that ideal, NCORE is committed to the promotion of equality of opportunity and treatment for all NCORE participants in NCORE-sponsored events, regardless of gender, gender identity or expression, race, color, national or ethnic origin, religion or religious belief, age, marital status, sexual orientation, immigration status, disabilities, veteran status, or body size. And with that, I am going to turn the webinars over to our first presenter, Ms. Stephanie Pelton-Miller.
Good afternoon. In being asked to speak today about self-care and personal and professional changes due to COVID-19, I thought to myself, I got this, I'm a social worker. I speak to my clients about this type of thing all of the time. However, in speaking to my colleagues about this, it became more evident that this would be more of a daunting task than I initially thought. when the media is talking about COVID-19, they're addressing things like loneliness and isolation. But when we started talking about and planning for this event, I realized that those of us who work in the area of social justice, medical fields, education, etc., probably would like to experience some loneliness. We are likely working harder than ever before, busier in our caseloads than ever before, and having to do it in new and different ways. At the same time, we're taking on new roles with families, as well as professionally. So our personal and professional lives have changed at this time. So as I get started, I want you to know that just because the media is not speaking to your reality or your stressors, it doesn't mean that your reality is less real, that your experiences are invalid, or that you should be at home living a stress-free life with all this extra newfound time due to COVID-19. Those of us who do social advocacy know that that type of work does not stop. And during a time of pandemic, the people that were disenfranchised previous to this probably are experiencing more problems because the disparities are more evident. So our caseloads may be higher while our work style and duties are changing as well. So some of the changes that people are having to experience professionally at this time are having to create a workspace so that you can do the telework that is now expected of you. We're having to use new technologies and platforms in order to complete the jobs and tasks that we have been given. So I know for myself, I'm having to be my own tech support because I'm no longer in the office that where the tech support is located. And for the things that I can't do on my own for tech support, my poor 17-year-old is having to be the tech support for me and keeps indicating that it's a smartphone with a dumb user. But that's how teenagers are. We're also dealing with things like increased email traffic related to COVID or related to job changes in other ways because we are now teleworking, as well as just the increased caseload. So when most people talked about teleworking from home, the things that they imagined are, maybe having a workout schedule, sipping coffee, relaxing. But as you see the slide on the right, the reality may be much different. In addition to the changes in work, we're also having to deal with the changes in family. So most of us now are serving as teachers to our kids. I saw a statistic recently that indicated that there are 1.5 billion children worldwide out of school at this time. So those kids have to be somewhere, and likely they're at home with you while you are trying to telework and perform your job duties. And then on top of that, you're having to schedule time for their Zoom meetings. I'm sorry, somebody asked me to go back to the previous slide. You're having to schedule your Zoom meetings for your kids. You're having to manage 2 to 3 online learning platforms for them. You're having to manage kids that may have different abilities and are in different grade levels. When you weren't cut out to be a 1st and a 5th grade teacher at the same time that you're trying to do your job duties. So our tasks for home have changed as well. And we're experiencing new roles in the home setting as well as those in the work setting. So we're wearing multiple hats at this time. So with all those changes, this slide indicates the changes for motherhood when working during COVID-19. I don't think this is what they meant when they referred to the mother load. And when I say mother load, I'm not trying to discount the fact that we have fathers that are working too. I work with several men in education who are at home with their children while their wives who are in the medical field are at work. So they are doing the lesson planning for their kids at the same time that they're teaching their classrooms, managing meals and groceries and that kind of thing as well. So we are all much busier during this time. Before I go to that slide, I would like to take a quick poll as to what new task you are experiencing at home and professionally as well. So if you can use your phones and go to the Menti Cloud and start adding in new roles professionally and personally that you may be experiencing. So some of the things that I see coming up are chef, teacher, counselor, tech support, organizer of activities. Okay, so all of these new roles that we were posting on our Menti, and the new personal and professional roles and the things that our bodies are experiencing are causing us to have exhaustion. So we are just physically and emotionally tired. And with all of this, I have not mentioned the anxiety that's underlying and the hyperarousal that accompanies the actual COVID-19 that we're all experiencing at this time. So as a result, our bodies may be experiencing some physical and emotional responses. The most obvious and evident indicator that our bodies are responding to stress and anxiety are the changes in sleep and the circadian rhythm. Disruptions like this may cause increased fatigue, so we may be feeling tired all the time. We also may have the disruption where we have problems with hyperarousal, so we're unable to sleep even though we are totally exhausted. This may result in increased work errors, shortness of temper, decreased immunity physically, which during a time when we are experiencing a physical pandemic that's contagious, we don't need our immunity to be down. And then when we do get sleep, it may be fretful, restless, and non-restorative. So these are, and on the high end of that, people that have sleep problems, that's sometimes an indication of depression. People that experience PTSD have interruption in their sleep. And PTSD does not only come from like military trauma where we hear about frequently, or sexual abuse. We're in a pandemic, people don't know what's gonna happen. So that is traumatic in itself. And we may be experiencing PTSD-like symptoms during a time like this. To combat those sleep problems, some things that we may do are to get 15 minutes of bright light upon waking up or first thing in the morning. So 15 minutes to an hour of bright light would be helpful. One thing that you can do to achieve that when you wake up is to open all the curtains and the blinds so that the bright light indicates to your body it's time to get up and get started. That will cause it to do the physical changes and respond to, okay, it's time for me to get up. If you don't want to open all the curtains, you can sit on your back porch and sip your tea, or your front porch and sip your coffee. You may want to use a UV light or a light box to get the light artificially if you don't have access to a sunny environment like I do here in Texas. Exercise early in the morning can indicate to your body that it's time to start your day. So exercising closer to wake up time, as opposed to in the evening when it's closer to bedtime. So if you combine the bright light and the exercise, going for a morning constitutional may be helpful. Limiting your alcohol and your caffeine, even though you're tired, using those artificial means of trying to pep up may cause other problems. And we all know that increasing your alcohol consumption during a time like this may lead to addiction and other problems. You want to keep a regular sleep and wake up schedule. So doing things the same time daily as you were when you were having to go into the office, instead of thinking, oh, I don't have to go anywhere in the morning, I can stay up later, or my commute will be shorter so I can stay in bed longer. Trying to keep a routine will be helpful to continuing restorative, restful sleep. Creating a bedtime routine would also be very helpful. So doing the same thing nightly to indicate to your body that it's time to wind down. So maybe reading a book, doing some yoga, getting rid of your screen time half an hour before bed may help you get into a pattern and a rhythm so that your body knows that it is time to wind down to sleep. Also, optimizing your sleep environment would be a good idea at this time as well. So doing things like making sure it's quiet, cool if you prefer to sleep in the cool, or warm if you're one of those people that likes it warm when you sleep, quiet and very dark. So if you had been thinking about maybe trying a weighted blanket during this time, it might be a good idea since we're all perusing Amazon more. Getting blackout curtains or getting a sleep mask may also be helpful. This is a slide from the military university on sleep hygiene, and just kind of goes to some of the things that I just recently spoke of. And I'm speaking to those things from the perspective that with soldiers, we have seen things such as hallucinations with long-term problems with not sleeping and other symptoms. So this is information on how to get restful restorative sleep. The other things that can happen with us, not only the problems with the sleep, are physical and emotional responses. During this time, we may experience the fight, flight, freeze response, because after all, when we are talking about fight, our president has already alluded to the fact that we are fighting an invisible entity when we are talking about this pandemic at this time. The general in Korea that manages the forces there has ordered that the soldiers attack COVID as if it were the enemy, and a military operation when they're looking at cleaning, social distancing, and that type of thing, because he feels that that's the only way to kind of minimize the threat. So several of us may be experiencing a fight response where our sympathetic nervous system has been activated as if we're going to deal with a threat. That may look like you are irritable, snappy, argumentative, angry for no known reason, or just an underlying feeling of anger and resentment. You may be more sarcastic. Realize that with this, people may be having grief reaction and may be tearful for no reason, or what they perceive as no reason, but really they may be grieving the fact that they had a child that was scheduled to graduate this year, and that celebration is not going to happen in the way that they imagined it did. They may be managing a child who, again, is a senior and had planned to do prom, has a dress or a tuxedo sitting in the closet and no dance to wear it to. So they're having to comfort or console their child. They may have had a significant birthday coming up with a travel destination party kind of thing. And so that is not going to happen as expected. So, you know, there may be normal grief reaction to the things that we are missing at this time. We also may be experiencing increased adrenaline and cortisol, which are the stress hormones. When that happens, we may tense our muscles due to hyperarousal. So we may startle more easily. Our muscles may be more tight. So we may experiencing tightness in our shoulders. I'm one of those people, I tighten my jaw muscles when I'm nervous or tense. So you may be experiencing some tightness here, low back tightness, and other muscle aches and pains as we're going through this time. The other thing that people may be experiencing is in preparation for fight, trying to be over prepared. So they may be consuming way too much news and media about COVID-19 and trying to respond in order to prepare and jumping on any trend that they hear, or just doing something so that they feel like they can be prepared, whether it's rational or not. So therefore we may have a rush on toilet paper and may not be able to buy that because people think, you know, there's a pandemic, I'm gonna need this item. People may have bought beans or rice or frozen vegetables because it was suggested by someone in the news recently. And they may not even know how to cook those things, but it was suggested, so they ran out and bought it. People might also be experiencing the flight response or the avoidance. That's where they're shutting down and sleeping, cruising the internet, or just tuning out and checking out in another way. They may be procrastinating on other tasks that they know that they need to accomplish at this time. They may be even flashing back to more nostalgic times or times that were normal to them. So in the news recently, on a Sunday morning show, it mentioned that people are buying food items even that have nostalgic memories, like Chef Boyardee or SpaghettiOs. Part of that may be that it's a kind of a comfort food as well. And it's easy and you can store it for a long time, but they are indicating that they're likely doing it because it brings back some childhood and hood memories. We also may be engaging in some negative habits that we should not, like the drinking and that kind of thing. In addition, the last one would be the freeze response. That is where our parasympathetic nervous system is activated and we may slow down. During this time, people may feed and breathe. So, you know, increased trips to the refrigerator, Their heart rate is probably slowing down at this time. Muscles that were tensed up or activated when we had the fight response may now have been activated so much that they are immobile. People may have trouble making decisions during this time. They may be experiencing brain fog, hard to make decisions, lack of hygiene, or even binge butt just from sitting there watching things on TV that they normally would not have watched. And then a general lack of physical activity or movement. Other physical symptoms are increased hand pain caused by repetitive movements or overuse. So since we have those emails and are having to type notes and things more frequently, the typing has led to hand pain and hand fatigue. Holding our cell phones more frequently may be causing problems. That finger swiping that we're doing, either for online shopping or other shopping, may be causing problems for us as well. We may have the increased body pains due to lack of movement, as well as poor circulation. Eye fatigue and eye strain because we're looking at screens all the time, and because we're indoors, we're not experiencing the variations in light. Maybe some of the other physical factors that we are experiencing during this time. Here are some ways to cope with stress on this slide, and I'll go into them more in depth. And then in a few minutes, I will go to the Menti, and I'll ask that you start typing in ways that you're going to commit to address your own health and wellness and self-care in the next week. So one of the things that you may want to do are to stay informed. Oh, just a second. Okay, so this is a second Menti. So one of the things that you may want to do are to stay informed, but not too informed. So, watch your appetite as far as the news that you're gonna indulge in. Make sure you're getting your information about COVID-19 from reliable sources like the CDC. Make a schedule. So when making a schedule, you may want to keep a calendar. You may want to get up and do your schedule daily. It just depends on what works for you. Realize that if you are a parent, you may have to put your kids' activities on those schedules so that you're not missing any of those, and you can kind of juggle those activities as well. Other things that you may want to schedule while you're doing that are exercise, because as we've already talked about, the lack of movement with us can cause and lead to some problems. So listing your exercise or scheduling your exercise when you are making your daily list of things to do. We are all using technology right now by force for work, but if you are feeling lonely, bridge the gap with your friends and family using the technology. Schedule Zoom parties or celebrations. Link up with friends that way. Many of us, like I said, have had to make changes in the activities that we were doing or had planned. So my family had a spring break trip scheduled, and we were going to go to an Erykah Badu concert for my child's 17th birthday. That was canceled. So instead, we streamed one of her Apocalypse concerts and linked up with friends on Facebook as if we were at the concert together and could chat about it. And I promise you, the parking was much better doing it that way, and the concessions were better than any concessions I've ever had at a concert venue before. Some of the other things that we can do are to think outside the box and try new things. A family that I worked with, the 6-year-old had a birthday, well, she was gonna be 6 and had a birthday coming up. And when I did the therapy session with her virtually, she leaned into the screen to me and kind of whispered, "Hey, can you call me on my birthday so that I can talk to more people than the ones that just live in this house?" So she and I talked to her mother after her session privately, and talked to the mother and challenged her to do something different for her party and not just not celebrate because we were in a time of COVID-19. So for her party, they ended up doing a drive-in or drive-by party for everything. So they got to drive through Chick-fil-A And the people in line at Chick-fil-A made a big deal about it being her birthday once the mom alerted them. In addition to that, they did a drive-through zoo at a town nearby so that she could drive through and look at the animals, still be out of the house and social distance. And then that evening they went to a drive-in movie in another town. So they made made the best of the changes that were going on, still isolated, and were able to celebrate her birthday with her being able to see some faces of people that she did not live with. In addition to that, we want to work on healthy eating, social distancing ourselves from the refrigerator so that we're not binge eating, meal planning if you can. And if cooking is not your thing, you still need to feed yourself and the kids. So take advantage of one of the restaurants or catering companies that is offering grab and go meals a week at a time or a day at a time. And they are doing that right now in ways to social distance. And, you know, there are several other ones and people are listing them now. So my time is ending. So in closing, I would like to say, if you need professional help, please seek it. Be patient with yourself and forgiving of yourself and others during this time. We're all in this together, so we might as well stick together. I've addressed some issues with family and personal changes during the time of COVID-19, and now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Emma to address intimacy at this time.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to present to you. I am coming to you from Baltimore, Maryland, where it's currently raining, but that is a nice sound for my garden. I put gardening up in Stephanie's activity there. So I'm going to be focusing on intimacy in this part of the presentation. I am a therapist in private practice, as Asia mentioned. I focus on sex therapy, relationships, and really intimacy, what that means, right? And so we're going to talk about how the pandemic and isolation are impacting our intimate lives specifically, as well as acknowledging that there's a difference in impact kind of based on our circumstances of isolation. We're going to talk about building and or maintaining our intimate relationships and some coping mechanisms, some of which will be familiar to you from what my colleague just shared, but others that are specific to the loss of intimacy. So first, let's define what intimacy is. Often when folks hear that word, they're thinking about sex, right? And that certainly is a part of intimacy. But really what we're talking about is the experience of a close relationship to someone else or to others, right? This usually includes vulnerability, mutuality, openness. It's so much more, right? And so when I'm working with clients, particularly my clients who I do couple sessions, what we're talking about is how to increase intimacy throughout their life, right? What does that mean to them, and what do they need in order to increase that in their life, right? So right now, there's a lot of different circumstances, right? So some folks are isolating without a partner. Some are isolating alone, apart from their partner. Some people are with their partner, with or without others, including their children. There's a difference in impact on trauma survivors and providers of care, which I think is a lot of the audience today. As Stephanie really covered well, we're being asked to provide a different level of care and really need to pay attention to our own needs as we do that. And certainly on marginalized people who are facing either the same oppressions amplified or new oppressions specific to the pandemic and isolation. So I'm not going to go too much into this because this was covered so well by my colleague. But what we're seeing here, one of my clients said that we've reached the 6-week mark of despair. My practice is in Washington, D.C., so I'm working with people in Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. And in this area, we're very much under still, spaces have not opened up, states have not opened up. So we're really getting to the point where for most people, we've been doing this now over 6 weeks. And these experiences are really happening for folks, right? So whether you had a anxiety-related disorder prior, a depressive-related disorder prior, most people are feeling some degree of symptoms of anxiety and depression, including fear, lack of control, loss of hope, fatigue, and so forth. Irritability and a lack of patience is something coming up, particularly with my couples who are isolating together. We were talking about how to work on patience. And specific to the changing of roles is thinking about what role in your life is not being fulfilled, right? For a lot of people, it's their partner role that they are not able to give energy to, after you have worked and taken care of the home and taken care of kids and done your own grieving process. We're not necessarily as available to our erotic or romantic selves, right? And then specifically, we're going through now a process of grief. For a lot of people, grief, they may have started grieving now because we're experiencing a lot of losses. And there's anticipatory grief as well, thinking about what the losses are going to be moving forward, either specifically because of the pandemic or because of the impact of the pandemic, particularly on the economy and so forth. Other things that are coming up are attachment issues. So, attachment really speaks to how we feel safe, what we need in order to feel safe. So in an experience of, global uncertainty and fear, we're all kind of activated around needing to feel safe and kind of going back to how we attach and get that safety for ourselves. I am sure, given the work that you do, you're familiar with the concept of compassion fatigue, but that is coming up in spades now, really. Either because those of us who are doing care work are doing so much more of it, but also perhaps because our own needs are greater now than they were prior. And thus, it is harder to maintain our compassion for others. We're also seeing an increase in suicidal ideation, right, as people lose hope. I would be remiss also if I didn't acknowledge the specific trauma impact of the pandemic that is around ongoing experiences of white supremacy, xenophobia, poverty. We have to acknowledge that the impact of pandemic and isolation is very different based on people's privilege and resources and experiences of oppression. So one of the things that I am, or not one of the things, perhaps the main thing that in my partner work I'm seeing is triggered responses, right? So, I'm working with people who are around each other now 24/7 and in a state kind of marked by all the things we just discussed in terms of, what people are experiencing. And so what's happening there is that everything that we learned in our childhood about how to survive trauma, survive day-to-day life, survive when things are scary, that's all coming up, right? What can be really difficult in a partnership is when two people have really different things coming up, right? They learned really different strategies. So, for instance, if someone learned that in order to be safe, in order to survive, you need to shut down emotionally, you need to disassociate from what's happening, you need to stop communicating, and their partner learned that, to survive, to be safe, they need to activate and take action and get organized and communicate a lot, those responses are going to be in conflict inherently. And we're seeing that a lot. And what I'm seeing particularly in my partners is, a partner saying, I just don't understand why he's doing X, Y, Z. you know, what they're doing is, you know, is making it harder for me because I need these particular things from my partner in order to feel safe. So, you know, the work that it goes into that is really understanding what are my survival mechanisms? What do I need? And how can I work together with my partner, frankly, the people in my home, so that we all have a degree of safety and access to what we need to survive. So let's talk about touch. Touch is incredibly important, right? As human beings, it's one of the things that differentiates us from other species. And not that other animals don't need touch, but our biology and psychology really requires us to need physical contact, right? When we're deprived of touch, it can have a severe, extreme emotional impact. So, you know, really what we're talking about, touching can relieve stress, literally, right? It can calm our nervous systems, which, as Stephanie shared earlier, you know, our nervous system is activated when we are in fear, when we are dealing with trauma, right? And we're all surviving through a collective trauma here. And touch can actually ease the nervous system, bring it down. Touch releases oxytocin, which is a hormone from the pituitary gland that makes us feel love, right? It makes us feel a sense of bonding and well-being. It's called the warm fuzzy hormone, right? Really important. We learn, you know, very early on with children, right, with babies, they are comforted so clearly by touch and contact from their primary caregivers, right? And that need continues throughout life. This phenomena, right, of what's happening right now in relation to touch, folks are starting to call this skin hunger, right? A deep longing for consensual physical touch from another person. This is the experience of touch deprivation. And again, it's very impactful, right? While we're not focusing specifically on sex and sexual intimacy in this presentation, we certainly need to acknowledge it. Dr. Emily Nagowski is a brilliant sex educator that I have trained with, and I highly always recommend her book, Come As You Are, to my clients. And from her, she reminds us that sex is an attachment behavior, right? It can be a form of it can take the form of passionate, joyful sex as an expression of people's love. It can also be desperate and painful and so forth. I'm expanding on the quote, when attachment is threatened. So, you know, acknowledging here the reality of the loss of sexual intimacy for many people who are either separate from their partner or living with their partner. So what can we do about this, right? You know, I'm a social worker. I imagine some of you are social workers. So it's never enough to just talk about what the problem is. We have to talk about solutions, right? So let's think about kind of the different populations that we acknowledged before. So for folks isolating alone, I imagine that this is nothing new here, right? That you haven't heard before, that you haven't considered for yourself, that you aren't doing already. I do find it helpful sometimes, though, to be reminded of these things, and particularly to kind of remind myself, you know, how much of this have I done in the last couple of days, this week, and so forth. I talk about all these things with my clients. What am I doing for myself, right? So making time and space in our lives to connect through group chats and video calls. The first week of June was supposed to be my 25-year high school reunion, and it's been great. It's obviously canceled, but it's been wonderful reconnecting with friends from high school through video calls. Consider the resources in your community as well as your personal resources, right? Think about the friend that you haven't talked to in a while, a neighbor that you have something specific in common with, that maybe there's an opportunity to connect over, just thinking creatively about who is in your life and what is available to you. There are local groups, of course, specific to different topics, but also neighborhoods on Facebook and Nextdoor. The one that I'm involved with here in Baltimore has been a lot about mutual aid, which has been really great to see. I'm giving everybody the reminder to connect not about coronavirus. This is something that I have to remind my mother about on a regular basis, that I am also watching the news, so I don't need to hear the updates from her again. If you're able to, volunteer. This is a wonderful way to feel like we are doing something. We have an element of control. We are giving to others and thus creating a connection. Find virtual forums that are talking about either what your experience is or something completely different from your experience, right? You know, if you like to knit things, I don't knit, I don't know what to put there, but you know, finding people who are also talking about that, and get outside. You know, obviously weather permitting and access permitting, but getting into, you know, changing our point of view by even moving outside. In thinking about solo intimacy and you know, our need for touch, you know, consider what you can do to get some of that touch input, right? And get creative. Hug and cuddle with a stuffed animal or a pillow. Do some self-massage. There's videos out there that tell you how to do this, right? Which is partly, you know, putting oil or lotion into your skin, relaxing your muscles, and also getting some of that touch input that many of us are craving. Take a long shower or bath. And this is really about feeling the water on your skin, right? And, you know, that kind of relaxation. Swaddle yourself in a blanket, you know, swaddle on the couch, swaddle in your bed, you know, wherever you're comfortable. Play with the feel of textures, pressures, kinds of touch, and temperatures on your skin. So this can be everything from very soft stroking to more pressure, using warmth, using cool, using different textures of material, all about creating different experiences. This may not for you meet the same kind of depth of need that you may get from a partner, but the idea is giving yourself some of these experiences to move through this experience to, you know, to the other end, whatever and whenever that may be. I am sure you can think of other ways of being intimate solo intimacy, and I will encourage you to explore that more for yourself. Other things to do, since we can't necessarily get our touch needs met, is to really think about our other senses, right? And indulge those senses. So, you know, from smell to sounds, and listening to eat, to taste, to, you know, looking at different images. What gives you impact, right? Often we are different kinds of learners, meaning that we take in information in different ways. And that can be a wonderful way to kind of lessen the impact of the loss of touch. And, you know, that means different things for different folks. I have found that being in my garden is both the smell of the freshness, the smell of the plants, and seeing all that green has been really rejuvenating for me personally. You know, I try to go out in between client sessions. Well, when you're isolating away from a partner, when you are, you know, separated, right? Really think about exploring other kinds of intimacy that perhaps we're not thinking about, right? We can't have physical intimacy, but what are ways that you can connect emotionally, physically, in other different ways, intellectually, spiritually? Consider how intentional communication about what you want your partner to know, to feel from you, what you want your partner to experience. Nurturing relationships can be challenging at any time, right? It's separate completely from pandemic, isolation, and everything else. Often my work with couples is about how hard it is to create intimacy time or focus on intimacy when people are working and commuting and taking care of children and, surviving in this world, right? All that entails. So really, this is a challenge that we're taking on in a new way, but is maybe something that we need to think about for all of our life. How are we creating intimacy with our partners? Think about writing. I have folks who are writing love letters to each other. One couple who is sending a journal back and forth that they're both writing in. Make a playlist, right? Or, send each other songs and create that as your playlist. That is your intimacy playlist. Don't use words, send images to each other. There's all kinds of ways once we start getting creative to think about how we can express ourselves to our partner. And again, that intentional communication. I want my partner to know this about me. I want my partner to feel this way or know how I feel. I want my partner to have this specific experience, right? Think about what intimacy is going to mean and building towards that for your reunion. Shadeen Francis is a fabulous sex therapist in Philadelphia, and she says, intimacy does not have to be completely lost during this time of physical distancing. We can stay creatively connected, knowing that on the other side of this, we will embrace one another again. And so the work that we're doing now, the intention we're putting into, the energy we're putting into staying connected and creating more intimacy, we will reap the rewards of when we are physically united with our partners. The brilliant Esther Perel, another kind of world-renowned couples therapist, says, and not specific to pandemic, love rests on two pillars, surrender and autonomy. Our need for togetherness exists alongside our need for separateness. So I was thinking about this quote when kind of putting together ideas about for couples specifically. So with partners, monitor your moods. Paying attention to and acknowledging how we're feeling, where we are emotionally, allows us to kind of process through them without taking it out on other people, right? And that's really important right now when we're having a lot of different moods. Speaking back to that triggered response from our childhood learning about how to survive, honor the differences you may have with your partner in coping and processing, right? Acknowledge them and talk about them so that you are both honoring their need, but also finding ways to work together to cope and process. Assume best intentions. So, I encourage the partners I work with all the time to have good faith, or to sort of hold good faith of their partner's intentions when they're communicating, even, when they're in conflict and so forth. Consider emotional safe words. So this would be something that you say, whether in conflict or when you're feeling particularly emotional or anxious, to communicate to your partner that you can't talk right now, right? There's a really clear way of saying, papaya, right? I need to go, without having to explain it, but just, communicating that is what's happening for me. Whenever I think of safe words, I think of fruit, and I'm not totally sure why, but papaya comes to mind. Consider the way that consider sharing appreciation and gratitude for your person, but also different ways that you can do that. So some, a general way is to think about sharing appreciation, not for what they do, but for how they make you feel. So for instance, rather than saying, thank you for getting up with the kids this morning, saying, thank you for, being a great co-parent. Thank you for sharing co-parenting with me and being a great parent. Consider boundaries for space and schedules. So, as we're isolated in these spaces, really think about how we can create personal space. I'm working with clients who are in tiny studio apartments in DC sometimes, right? So there's a challenge around space. But really, when you can create some boundaries, be they physical or otherwise, that denotes personal space and gives us a sense of us as an individual, right? There's benefit for the partnership. So this can include with our schedules, right? Making sure that you have your own time within the schedule. Find ways to miss each other, right? We're not getting those opportunities when we're together all the time. Be specific in your schedule for date time, right? Which, may be different than watching TV together all day long, right? But date time is something different. Be gentle with each other and focus on your own self-care to support your resiliency. All right, so you may be familiar with love languages. And what I like about this image particularly is that it talks about when you know your partner's love language, because that's a really important part of this. It's not just knowing our own, but knowing our partner's. This talks about how to communicate, actions to take for them, right, in service of their love language, and things to avoid. So I'm not going to read through all of this for the sake of time, but I am going to ask us to think about and share our love language. So switching now. Okay, that is not what I wanted to do. If you can go to menti.com and use this code and share your love language. I'm curious to see what we will find from this group of folks. And I included other there because the idea of love languages is, limited in its scope. There may well be other things that, to you are very meaningful in terms of feeling love, right? I certainly, obviously don't know the experiences, the genders, the professions specifically of the people who are responding. So it's interesting to see a connection there to what people's love language is. I see a question about the slides. The slides are going to be shared with you. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go back to the last slide, but you will have this. You will get this information. All right. I wonder what it says about us as a community that receiving gifts is a smaller number. I don't know. I have no, hypothesis about that, but I think it's really interesting. Really cool to see. So this, looking at this and thinking about quality time, right? For those of you who answered quality time, this may be an opportunity if you're isolating with a partner to think about what that means in the context of constant time together, as one suggestion. So going back now here, yeah. So, thinking about that information, again, your love language and your partners can really help inform the choices you make about intentional intimacy. I want to leave us with this quote. So collective trauma necessitates collective healing. Jack Saul is a psychologist that specializes in large-scale psychosocial trauma and collective resilience. Collectivity, the community connection are the opposites of isolation, right? And our acts of intimacy as well. So I think all of us thinking about not just how we're surviving right now, but how we're going to heal on the other end, heal ourselves, heal our relationships, heal our families, our communities. is you know, a really important piece of this that I want to focus on. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share my work and some of the things I do and think about. We're now going to move from focusing on intimacy to exploring the issue of loneliness with Victoria Stubbs. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Good afternoon, everyone. As Emma said, I'm going to be talking more about self-care, but I wanted to actually do a little deeper dive into identifying and managing loneliness. I've actually been discussing this a lot with my clients recently, and we've really been talking a lot about how the pandemic is putting a spotlight on so many things right now that have just been underneath the surface, particularly systemically, but also personally. And so we've been talking a lot, of course, about how it's exacerbating anxiety, but it's also causing a lot of us to take a closer look at loneliness. So before I get started, I'd love to know, going back to our good old mentee again, I'd love to know from each of you, what do you think triggers loneliness? So if you could go over to mentee and just add in, spend a little bit, just a couple of seconds thinking about, what do you think triggers loneliness? Unwanted social isolation, absolutely. Ooh, lack of purpose, loss of connection. Yes. Yes. Lack of personal interactions, lack of agency, same routine over and over. Absolutely. People not understanding me. Absolutely. Boredom. Yes. Person with COVID in the home where they have to isolate, envy of others. Good. Feeling as though your worldview is misunderstood. Yes. Unexpected changes. Absolutely. Lack of support, lack of intellectual connection. Unrequited love. Absolutely. Lack of spirituality. Yes. Absolutely. Systemic lens. Being a caretaker. Absolutely. Thank you. As we can see from all of the thoughts, everything that folks are contributing, life triggers loneliness, right? Life triggers loneliness. So jumping back over, thank you all for adding that in. So the timing of this talk was rather interesting because this time of year is usually difficult for me because I'm exhausted from the grind of the academic year. And I'm in what I call the grading abyss. So this is me right here in the abyss. Some of you might be familiar with this by another name, maybe the writing abyss, maybe the studying abyss, maybe the researching abyss, right? It's the space that I enter to grade papers and exams for days on end. It feels like it's never ending. So I wake up, I grade, I eat, I grade, then I go to sleep, and then I repeat. Until miraculously it's over and I'm able to crawl out, right, into the sunlight, out of the abyss, and that's when I sleep for the month of June. So I'm in this space right now. So when I got asked to participate in this webinar, I was finishing up my final online lectures when I got a call from my best friend who lives in New York City. She informed me that she had just suddenly lost her partner to a non-COVID related blood clot. The next day, I got word that my uncle, who had been in the Chicago hospital because of the coronavirus, had died that afternoon. Life was still happening. Life was still happening. And I'm fortunate because I have a village of wonderful, supportive people, supportive friends who FaceTimed with me, who brought me food, who called, who were really checking on me. However, after a couple of days of difficulty sleeping, headaches, long bouts of crying, I felt overwhelmingly drained and I needed to withdraw. I was overwhelmed by life and felt completely lonely. So loneliness. It isn't the same as isolation. Isolation describes the number of people that we have around us. Loneliness is how we feel regardless of whether we have people around or not. And as I stated, my friend group that I call my village, they were amazing. And yet I still felt lonely. According to Dr. Vivek Murthy in his new book, Together, loneliness is a discrepancy between the connections that you need and the social connections that you have. So he describes 3 dimensions of loneliness. Intimate or emotional, which is a longing for a close confidant or partner with whom you share a deep bond of affection and trust. Relational or social, which is a yearning for quality friendships, social companionship and support. And then collective loneliness, which is a hunger for a network or community of people who share your sense of purpose and interests. And so this doesn't mean that our existing connections are deficient. What it means is that there might still be a gap in one of these other dimensions. So you might find yourself in a really loving, fulfilling, intimate relationship and still have moments of loneliness. Not because your partner needs to do more, but perhaps you are yearning for a deeper, more meaningful social connection. Working in many of our academic and social justice institutions and organizations can also contribute to loneliness. When we find ourselves being the only, right? Some of you mentioned this in the trigger, not getting the supports that we need. A few of you said being misunderstood, being silenced, right? Feeling marginalized. So maybe not having the collective, right? So it might be a collective loneliness. We could have an amazing friend group, like the one that I mentioned that I have, an awesome collective, and yet have no one to tend to us in an intimate or emotional way. So what does loneliness look like? So loneliness can show up in a few different ways. And these are just a few. I'm sure many of you can think of others, but as I mentioned, social withdrawal, right? So something that I felt I needed to do was to just step away from everyone and really be to myself. It could show up as anger, right? Like sometimes we're just angry with the world and we may not even really know why. But again, right underneath the surface might be loneliness. Irritability. Emma mentioned this in her presentation, right? It could be irritability coming out even towards our partner, right? And again, not because our partner necessarily needs to do something, but during this time of quarantine, we could be missing, having a gap in another area. We could be missing out on social connections or even collective because we're working from home and we're used to being in workspaces where we can interact differently. So that irritability could be coming out. Sadness, right? We might just feel an overwhelming sense of sadness. As I mentioned, even for my own social withdrawal, I had days where I was getting through with seeing clients and immediately would get a lump in my throat and just get really sad, and would just have to have crying bouts, right? And then of course, anxiety. And we've been talking a lot about folks feeling anxious, but particularly as it relates to loneliness right now, because so much of our future is unknown, right? How do we date when we're quarantining, right? What is dating going to look like when we have to social distance, even when this is over, right? What are the things that we're going to have to pay attention to differently, be concerned about as it relates to connecting with others? So the anxiety definitely shows up as thinking about how we navigate the future. We sometimes forget that we are whole beings, right? With a mental body, a physical body, an emotional body, a sexual body, and a spiritual body. Some of you mentioned spirituality, right, is one of the triggers. And so each one of these bodies has a need. And we have to recognize that one person or one group cannot fulfill all of our needs all of the time. So that can result in loneliness in these different areas. The paradox about addressing loneliness is that it's actually best done alone. Of course, there's always room to strengthen our relationships, cultivate new relationships. But in this time of quarantining, that might not really be possible. So what to do? So as Emma said, we always, as social workers, we have a plan. We want to think about, okay, here's what we want to do. And so I say, practice intentional self-love. And I emphasize intentional because I think that in this day and age, when we talk a lot about self-care, that in and of itself can become routine, right? It's just sort of another thing that we do, which is still good. But when we make it intentional, it really slows us down for the purpose of focusing in on ourselves in a much more meaningful way. And so that's why I say intentional self-love. So these are my 10 ways that you can practice intentional self-love. And so again, given that we are forced to be home, we can use this opportunity to be still and to take a deeper look at our relationships, starting with the relationship that we have with ourselves. And so we can start to examine, right, like what's going on with us. And these are just 3 questions that you can start with. Do you like you? Do you like spending time with you? Do you tend to you the way you tend to others, including your work? A lot of us put a lot of emphasis into how well we're performing at our jobs, which is great. And we're doing research and we're growing. We want to be better in those ways. Do we turn that inward and actually look at attending to ourselves in the same way? Do you check in with yourself, right? Do you just check in to see how are you feeling? What's going on in your body? Feel your feelings, right? So even just asking yourself those 3 questions could evoke some feelings. And so recognize and name what you're feeling. Give yourself permission to feel your feelings. Trust them. They're yours, right? Feelings are meant to inform us and then move through. The longer we actually ignore them, the longer they stay around. So feel them, listen to them, listen to what they're telling you about yourself, listen to what they're telling you about your situation, right? Because they're yours. This also gives you the chance to tune into yourself, to figure out what you actually need. What dimension of loneliness might have a gap for you? Might it be intimate? Might it be social? Might it be collective? Number 3 is to weep, because sometimes that's all we can do is to just weep. Sometimes what you're feeling, right? When you actually sit and allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, you might need to weep. Like I said a few weeks ago, when getting the information about my uncle, about my friend, I cried for about 30 minutes and I kept trying to stop, but it just kept coming. It just kept coming. And I had to just sort of sit with that because that's all I really could do. My body just needed to weep. And so that's okay. Number 4 is to ask for what you need. Stephanie talked a lot about the many roles that we now have, whether we're parenting, we're students, we're executives, all from home. We may need time, right? If we're with a partner, we might need to ask our partner, hey, can you take this shift? I just need a few minutes to be able to take a hot shower or to take a walk or just to have some downtime. I have a student who's a single mother of a 4-year-old, and she makes sure to ask me weeks sometimes in advance, hey, when are you going to post this particular thing and how long is it going to take? Because I need to make sure that I get childcare, because she wants to be able to still participate in the educational process. So I can't be mad at that, right? Because she's asking for what she needs. She's trying to figure out a way to take care of herself, because for her, right, the intentional self-love is to be able to have undivided attention with her work. Number 5 is to sleep, right? So asking for what you need might mean time to just go to sleep, take a nap, get some restorative sleep. Number 6 is to recognize and respect your own bandwidth. A lot of us are being asked to do a lot of additional things, right? While we're at home, contribute to newsletters, attend a lot of meetings, provide input or insight on this because so much is happening, continue to do your Zoom happy hours, all these different things. And sometimes we just have to recognize our social and our emotional bandwidth to know when we just can't take on anymore, right? We just cannot contribute to one more social media thing, right? Maybe you can't do that 7th Zoom meeting of the day, right? Maybe you can't do that 5th happy hour, virtual happy hour for the week. Maybe you just need your own downtime. And so recognize your own social and emotional bandwidth. Create daily or weekly self-love rituals so that you tend to yourself in meaningful and fulfilling ways. I love that someone wrote in Stephanie's presentation, someone wrote, do hair and makeup again. I love that because I think in this COVID time, right, a lot of us have not been wearing any makeup, have not been wearing any jewelry, unless we just been bearing it, right? And so I love that because I just started wearing jewelry just a few days ago. And now it's become much more intentional, me putting on jewelry or me intentionally putting on makeup, because it actually makes me feel better, right? So finding different things that you can do daily. Other people put in a gratitude practice. That's something else that I've been doing and talking to clients about. Of course, meditation, but it could also be something like the beginning of the day, you start off and make yourself a cup of tea. And if the weather is nice, you sit outside. And that's your 15, 20 minutes of just tending to yourself and getting yourself ready for the day. It could be at the end of the day, right, where you pour a glass of wine or some other libation, and you sit on your balcony or do something, right? You can have a hot bath, get some dried flowers, some essential oils, incense, candles, put your playlist on, right? And just take a few minutes, maybe at the end of the week. That's how that's the ritual that you use every Friday, right? To close out your week. But I say ritual because, again, it makes it intentional and it makes it an experience that you're having and not just some other thing that you're doing. Emma mentioned self-massage. And here's where, again, that ritual of like when we're putting on lotion, right? Like that could be your form of self-massage. I had a little jar of some shea butter with oils in it, and it was actually called Love. And I used that for my self-love ritual. And I would just take time, and maybe you have an affirmation or mantra that you say when you're putting it on. And so now you're getting in your self-massage and you're moisturizing and you're tending to yourself in a way that's just very nourishing for yourself. Number 8 is to identify people who can hold space for you without expectation, okay? Someone that can just be a presence when you talk or when you cry. Yes, this is a selfish act, but we all need space to be heard, to be seen, and sometimes to be held. And number 9, of which I'm biased because I'm a therapist, but it's to find a therapist. Because frankly, if you do numbers 1 and 2, stuff might come up for you that you might want to unpack, that you might need to explore, that might be beyond someone just holding space for you. And so now is actually a really good time to start to browse online and start looking for a therapist. A lot of us are doing telehealth right now, so you can start to engage with the therapist to see who's a good fit. Even if you're not committing right now, you can engage and see who might be a good fit, so you can actually start to do some, again, intentional work on yourself. And then for number 10, it's to practice grounding and centering techniques. This is particularly for those of us and my clients who were having an anxious moment, and our minds might be really frazzled. Either it's right after a meeting, for example. Sometimes I have clients come in who are really just sort of all over. And so taking a moment to just ground yourself and center yourself in the present moment. And so these are a few things that, for example, right now, you could take a moment to notice 4 red things in your room or in your space that you're in. Just take a moment to do that. And so didn't take a lot of time, right? But what that does is that in that short little bit of time, it brings you back into the present moment, back into your space. And again, it sort of moves some of the anxious thoughts just to the side a little bit. You can begin each or at least one meal mindfully by engaging all of your senses. And again, Emma had talked about sort of that engaging of the senses. And here again, we're bringing that in a mindful way. And it doesn't have to be an elaborate meal. It could be toast, right? Whatever you're having for breakfast. But the goal is to just slow down and really experience the piece of toast, right? Experience your food in a way that you're looking at it, you're smelling it, you're tasting it, you're experiencing, you're touching it, you're actually tasting it when you put it in your mouth. We're so quick sometimes to just eat and get it down our throats, but actually let it linger and like get the flavor of the food. Listen to the sound that it's making when you're chewing it, for example, right? So just slowing ourselves down. And again, when we're focused on that piece of toast or whatever it is that you are choosing to eat, again, it just brings us into the present. It slows us down and it just sort of moves some of the anxious thoughts to the side. Now, granted, when my students have done this, they just find it very silly. And so you might find it silly and you might end up laughing at yourself, but that's fine too, because we know laughter is good for the soul. So now you've done 2 things. And lastly, you can also do a body scan. Like I mentioned, this is something that, again, that I do with my clients who come into session and are really just sort of, their thoughts are all over the place. They feel frazzled. They don't really know where to sort of begin the session. And so just as a way to take a few minutes to calm the nervous system down, we'll do a body scan. And so I actually invite you right now to participate in a grounding and centering exercise of doing a body scan with me, just quickly. And so if you're playing this webinar in the background while you're moving around, as we tend to do, I invite you to just stand wherever you are, or if you're seated, to continue being seated. And we're just going to take a few minutes to drop into ourselves, drop into our bodies, without judgment, right? Without analysis, just as a way to calm ourselves down. So I invite you, if you're comfortable, to close your eyes, and we're just going to walk through this. And so I just want you to start by taking 2 deep breaths. And we're just going to start with our feet. And we're just going to feel our feet wherever they are, on the floor, if you're laying down, just feeling your feet grounded in wherever you might be sitting or standing. And we're just going to move up in your mind's eye, just sort of move up to your shins. We're just going to notice, just notice if there are any sensations, any tightness. I'm just going to breathe into that space and release. And then continue to move up your legs to your knees, into your thighs, and just notice, are you gripping, right? Are you holding yourself tight in any way? And just breathe and release. No judgment, no analysis. Just breathe. And then move up into your stomach. Notice. Breathe. Maybe you're hungry. Maybe you have butterflies. Just notice. And then move up into the chest and the heart space. And just breathe. Notice. And then move up into your shoulders, where we often hold a lot of tension. Just notice if there's any tightness. It might be a good time for you to do a couple of shoulder rolls. Just breathe, notice, release. And then move up into your neck, another place that tends to be tight. Just notice. Maybe tilt your head from one side to the other. Breathe, release. And then moving up into the head and the face, particularly noticing the forehead, the brow area, that third eye area where we often are squinting. So we're thinking so hard, we're squinting at the screen. Notice your jaw, right? We're often holding a lot of tightness in there. Just notice, breathe, release. And then take 2 more deep breaths. And we just bring ourselves back to attention. And that's just a very short, quick something that you can do, again, wherever you are at any point in the day, just to ground into center. And so with that, I wish you love, light, and continued healthiness. And I thank you.
Thank you all so much for attending this webinar series on strategies for maintaining intimacy, physical health, and mental well-being. We really do appreciate it. On your screen, you should see the contact information for each of our presenters: Stephanie Pelton-Miller, Emma Kupferman, and Victoria Stubbs. Their emails are provided below. You will be receiving a you will be receiving a copy of the presentations. Also, please evaluate the session that you just attended. In the chat box, you'll find a link to the evaluation. On your screen, you'll also see the same link as well as the QR code. Your feedback helps us to provide future programming and also provides feedback to our presenters on their presentation. Again, we really do appreciate your attending. We hope that this helped during this trying time, and we look forward to seeing you at our third session on May 13th. Goodbye.